Hi everyone, good evening, and we're now up to day 34. Quick note before I start today, shirt. Getting more into the performance mode, I kind of got this shirt that reminds you which is upstage and which is downstage, or left and right. And it's just sort of a little cheat sheet, so to speak. It's been a long time since I've been on stage. But let's dive in. I've been talking about the fact that I'm now using sort of colors to organize the focus of a day. So I can rotate pieces around, but the type of work I'm doing sort of has a theme for the day. I think yesterday was blue, today is gold. And the way I defined this day was stability, maintenance, strong execution, but not going for new breakthroughs. Honestly, the framing ended up defining the entire day. I did start later than usual. I try to get up at 5:30 so I can do all my work before the rest of the family. And the alarm went off. I looked at my watch. It said 5:30 aces. And I shifted my weight to get out of bed. I looked one more time at my watch and it said 8:30. So apparently my body just needed extra sleep today. And considering how the day became a lot more reflective, I'm kind of glad that I got that. So, morning primary session today. Primary doesn't quite mean what it did before, but it's still the one I'm going to be focusing on more. And that was Be Prepared. My two takes today were 157 and 158. I'll just refer to them as first and second. The first take felt like what I described in my notes as a cold engine take. It started. Everything technically worked. The car drove fine. Nobody listening to it would have probably known anything was really off. But internally, I could feel the difference. It was like the engine was still gradually coming online while the song was already moving forward. So most of the bass notes formed. Most of them resonated clearly, and overall the energy did stay connected. Playback revealed a couple of subconscious line reading experiments, and I was able to immediately file them in the bucket of nope, not right reading at all. But one of the biggest technical lessons from that take wasn't so much about notes, it was about the continuity. I ran out of breath at one point and did what's a catch breath. You know, you're talking and then you just take that quick breath. And I had a staggered catch breath, and I thought I'd hidden it really well enough that it wouldn't have stood out. Playing it back made it painfully obvious. I actually stopped mid-phrase. It was almost like I did that. Hearing the break happen so clearly reinforced something I understood, but I had it intellectually. Now I really needed to feel it in my face. Phrase continuity matters emotionally, not just technically. It was glaring, but even with that mistake or flaw, I'm not going to use the word mistake, I got this whole list of vocabulary words that I avoid. What was I saying? Even with that flaw, it was still undeniably a good take. And then I went on to the second one. And honestly, the second one became much deeper than simply another run. I specifically wanted to let the now warmed up engine just do its thing without trying to improve on what I'd done. And what surprised me most was that my strongest reaction to the entire experience ended up not being in any way technical or to some degree even musically related. I realized I was getting, as I've mentioned in the past, less and less of a dopamine rush after listening and finishing a really good take. It started with, I hit a really fantastic take and you're like, yes, I feel good. The rest of the day is going to rock and all that. Now it wasn't happening and I didn't mind it. But this left me curious. I mean, why had this faded? Was I bored? And I thought about it a while, and I realized it was like a positive praise rush. It was a feeling that I had satiated validation seeking. To simplify it, the best way I could describe the mentality that had been giving me that rush was, ooh, singer do good. I get a cookie today. And what struck me today was realizing that the dopamine hit, it was not about singing. It was about approval, that was it good enough? Honestly, that was a false high, because the truth is that I'm not singing to please somebody. And I'm going to step back from what I'm talking about in relationship to an audience. But when I sing, I am singing for the sake of singing. If I'm in front of an audience, and everybody's seen this, if I am singing for the audience's approval, I come off as egotistical, full of myself. I don't come off like a good singer. But if I'm in that moment, lost and just creating the character, that's where the truth comes from. And there's no need for validation seeking. Performing for the sake of performing, art for art's sake. It's carved on a lion somewhere, I think. The work itself should be enough. And for the first time, I realized that it actually felt like it was. I was comfortable with what I was creating. I was comfortable with myself without needing reward or acknowledgement for what I was doing. And that really was important. Now, I'm not saying that I'm now perfect, but I'm really satisfied with progress. I feel like it's moving forward. I feel like I am accomplishing what I am trying to find myself doing. So anyway, that realization then connected to something that I've noticed over time. And that is that I don't really chase takes anymore. And what that means is I did this wrong, so I want to do it again so I can fix that. And I think I finally understood why. Once the performance moment is over, it's over. I can reflect on it. I can learn from it. I journal about it. I can't go back into that exact moment again. I mean, unless I successfully build a TARDIS, but still working on that. But short of time travel, the moment itself is gone. And I realize I don't actually want to spend all my time trying to recreate old moments anymore. I want to create new, truthful ones. Because if I'm constantly trying to recreate a previous performance, and even worse, exactly, then eventually I'm not really creating anymore. I'm copying. And at this point, it was like dominoes on realizations. It connected to something I've noticed for years at genre conventions. When I love talking to actors and voice performers, but not about the jobs, but about the craft and the art. And because fans will ask incredibly detailed questions about scenes and performance choices. And honestly, I realized I wasn't surprised when performers were decades removed from those moments emotionally. I mean, we are, for the most part, and I'm looking at you, Mary Lou Henner, are not designed to retain every word we've ever spoken. However, I did notice it when a performer was weeks removed from a performance. Audiences often imagine performers carry those moments around constantly afterwards. But I think performers are deeply in the moment when they're performing, and then afterwards they mostly let the moment go so there's room to move on to the next one. And I realize I may be starting to approach my singing that way. I'm trying to be fully in the moment while it's there, and then let it pass afterwards so there's room for me to find new moments. So later in the morning, I was driving my son and I to the dentist, and I was talking at him and telling him all about my epiphanies for the morning. And I realized slowly that there was one correction that I had missed, and that is that performers don't actually leave everything behind. They carry forward the things that contribute to the growth, either their personal growth, the growth of their instruments, the growth of what they're working on. Everyone's sort of like a jigsaw puzzle, building outward from the center over time. Experiences become pieces. Some connect structurally and stay because they fit into the type of thing you need to add to grow. Others just aren't meant for your puzzle, and they go away. And the interesting thing is that sometimes the important moments don't even look like important moments at first. Sure, sometimes there is a positive experience and you want to tack that on. And sometimes there are hard or ugly experiences and they tack themselves on. Sometimes they pass by so quickly you don't even realize that there was something that you are going to grow from until later. I'm not thinking days, years, whatever. So I got an example, and this came from a few days ago. I talked about a line reading for Scar. And, you know, he's got the line, "You won't get a sniff out of me." On the one take, and it was while my son was sitting with me, I pushed on me. "You won't get a sniff out of me." And my son told me it was wrong, and I didn't think it felt right. I listened to it and said, "Oh yeah, that's wrong." Now, it's been a day or two, so yeah, the line reading is still with me. But I don't think that's what's going to stay with me in the long run, because I don't want to get out of it, "Don't read a line like this." I want to know why. Why does it sound bad? Why should I not do that? And I return to the fact that this is my Scar. I have to understand how my Scar would think so that in a moment of bursted anger, it would come out still representing his internal makeup. And I thought about the line and I came to the conclusion Scar would rather have somebody focused on the thing they desperately want than focus on the fact that he's the one threatening them. So if I'm going, "You won't get a sniff out of me," then I'm the one who's threatening you. But if I say, "You won't get a sniff," well, it's like, "Oh, you're going to be deprived." And that really, for me, shows Scar's conniving in how he positions himself as someone people respond to. And that understanding will absolutely continue shaping how I build my presentation to Be Prepared. But I will probably never think about that line reading again, but as I absorb it, I probably will never make that kind of a line reading again. And I think that's the difference. You don't always carry the exact moment forward. You carry the things that change in you in such a way that they help you grow. And at least to me, grow in a positive manner. There are people who grow even worse, but that's really not for this conversation. Okay, so the next playback did reinforce the entire session stayed firmly inside the goals of a goal day. The energy calibration overshot slightly compared to the previous one, but it stayed close enough to center that the overall balance still held. One phrase lost breath support near the end, but instead of breaking continuity with a catch breath, I kind of curled the end of the word off early and musically, which sounded much more natural and intentioned. Again, the bass notes are remaining present, even though they're getting weakened after two successive performances of the same thing. Slightly toward the end, and the final slide nearly reached bottom, but didn't. I haven't really sung since then. My voice is actually getting deeper again, but it's not bringing up notes very much with resonance. It's late. It's not the best time for me to try for an A1. Overall, it was just a really, really good take with a lot of amazing philosophical realizations, which I think in the long run are going to matter more than any note that I sang during that session, or maybe even today. So let's talk about the later session. I did Boulevard in the afternoon, same philosophy, that it was for keeping the cohesion and not reaching for anything new. And it explored something completely different. But it was still through that same idea. Yesterday, I tried to steer away from my new technique and discovered that everything kind of lost support. And the biggest realization actually happened before I started rehearsing. When I start, because Boulevard is higher, I have a little app piano. I think I've shown it in a previous episode. And first I'll plunk out a C3 and I'll hum it. And then I'll probably go up to an F3 and then maybe a C4. And I hit the C3 today and I was like, well, that's low. Which is a strange reaction, because there have been days I've gone, that's a really high note and it's only a C3. And I hit the F3 and that was kind of low. And I hit the C4 and that was comfortable and not a problem. And then I hit the F4 and then I put the piano down thinking I just casually hit an F4. Cool. It wasn't a reach. It was just yet another note. So it was ordinary. It was accessible. And the contrast between that ease and the much more effortful feeling of formal rehearsal reinforced something I've been increasingly suspicious of. Some of the remaining barriers are not vocal. They are the way I supervise myself. My conscious oversight itself is interfering with the vocal coordination during a studio recorded performance. And that idea really became one of the defining themes of the afternoon. I did my first take, and it focused heavily on trying to stay aligned again with the newer coordination pathway without overdriving everything. And one thing was really obvious, and that is that the new technique is really becoming the lane that the voice wants to travel in, not a separate mode I have to activate. And listening to it and taking it in, that first take felt like I was trying to edge the car at a fork in the road toward where the new technique was, but not edging toward the new technique, just trying to edge toward the road that had the new technique. and the idea is implemented rather than attached. So let me just go over that first take. Okay, so section 1, which is the initial entrance, very weak, very weak. My sustains, I just can't figure out how to properly create a sustain at that range. And as a result, if I take the passage as a block that has a sustain in it, the block is advancing, but the sustain is actually lagging behind everything else in terms of resonance, growth, coordination, which really makes it begin to stand out audibly, structurally from everything around it. The low part also gave me an interesting revelation. When I listened to it, I was obviously moved back towards some of the new coordination, but there were tiny little holes between words. There wasn't that legato sense of connection. Even if the words were abrupt, they felt like there were tiny little holes in them. And it wasn't a breath issue, but it felt like moments where the conscious supervision was peeking in to see if everything was still working right. And it was in those moments that I interrupted the continuity. Third section is the chorus. And the newer vocal color was not there. Those F4s that I had earlier, now I was squeezing out rather than pointing at. And the good news was the transition to that last section. What has been the problem there has been that the chorus energy basically kidnaps the next verse and forces it to be at that same level. And if 3 is too strong, then 4 is too strong. Today, instead of letting that heightened energy drag 4 up, I consciously rode the momentum down, like guiding a horse galloping downhill. But I was either riding on the energy or riding in the energy, so gradually redirecting it into a more controlled level. 3 felt too hot, so I felt I've got to pull this down. And the result worked. The energy level was more controlled, or at least more to be positioned where I wanted it. The vocal color was up, and there was even more connection to the lyrics. So there was one more take, and I'm trying to remember why I decided to do it. I remember I was trying to distract my conscious looking around at what I was doing by immersing myself more into the heart and soul of the piece. Now, arrangement-wise, it's done very staccato and very unemotional, but you have to connect to it on one level before you can take that level away. So I wanted to focus on what I was saying so that I was talking about ideas, not throwing out words. And at first, it kind of was regressive. The melodic contours flattened. The color weakened. A lot of old habits started showing up again. But the playback revealed something a little more nuanced. Reducing the conscious technical supervision improved that continuity and lyrical connection, especially in that bass, darker line where many of the earlier dropout points all but completely disappeared. And at the same time, it became increasingly obvious that the new coordination is already carrying a lot more structural support than I really feel like it was. The earlier session showed what happened when I intentionally deprioritized the technique. And this session suggested differently that when I loosen the oversight, the voice begins negotiating between the old and new systems. I remember feeling like something was locked in while I was still thinking about it, and the actual playback sounded like there was a push-pull going on between the old and the new system, jockeying for dominance. And I didn't feel it, I heard it. But this realization had reframed how I was looking at instability. By the end of the session, my clearest conclusion wasn't that it's unstable. It's that I'm actually going through an entire reconstruction. I'm using different pieces to do what I was doing before with other pieces. And this was how it was when I started implementing a technique. Things were bouncy, things were fighting. So I kind of think that right now where I am, everything is reconstructing, and that means there's a lot of work ahead. Balancing, being able to have consciousness of what's going on without affecting it, being able to bring up an authentic performance connection. And next week, we'll probably continue feeling bumpy. I think in retrospect, when I commented about the vocal coach offering me directions and the gut instinct is to go record and send it back, my initial response was, give me at least a week to work with it. And today's realization really kind of underscored that that was the right decision. Unlike earlier phases of developing technique, I'm not alarmed by where I am. When it started kicking in initially, it was like, well, now I've lost complete control and it's just worse. And am I even a singer? Can I sing? And that led for a long time. But going through it again, I've experienced integration. I recognize how this process can work. So I actually ended the session in a very calm state, and I decided, okay, I've done it twice. Neither is really worth keeping archived. The notes that I make during a take, after a take, that contained really everything I was feeling, everything I was reacting to, everything I would talk about here. But keeping the actual audio really, I think, risked pulling me back into that mindset of trying to chase, trying to say, okay, this was wrong. This is the section I need to focus. No, I don't need to focus on it. I need to just release the entire thing. And I think the most important realization of the afternoon, and possibly the whole day, is that instability, things not sounding right, they're not failure. They are progress. They are directional change. I'm beginning to recognize it as a sound of reconstruction. One of the things I treasure about my spouse is they don't expect immediate change, but they like to see a learning curve, at least seeing some realization. And I think that has changed me for the better as a person to get that feeling. But I parallel it with really a lot of what I went through today. As I sit here racking my brain, I really think I've touched on what really was today's clue by 4. So I'm going to wrap things up for day 34. If you have been watching this episode, thank you, and hopefully parts of it made sense. If you are not watching this episode, I don't understand who I'm talking to at the moment. As in, you're not never mind, it's confusing. Anyway, I'm a little punchy from today, so as always, later.